3,000 years ago, nomadic early Persians roamed the parched, forbidding Iranian plateau. Finding water meant traveling long distances. It fell to a hybrid engineer, geologist and diviner to figure out how to bring it back to his people. They began by harnessing gravity to exploit the natural topography of their land, which sloped relentlessly down from the Alborz Mountains towards the Persian Gulf. 2,000 years before Rome's legendary aqueducts, the Persians were channeling massive amounts of water over long distances. In hot, dry climates, with minimal loss due to leakage or evaporation. Cyrus the Great came to power in 559 BC. It was the beginning of the Achaemenid dynasty. Their reign would change the course of history and redefine architectural possibility.
Cyrus created and maintained an empire thanks no doubt to his military savvy, but he was also a political genius. He was an excellent, benevolent manager of men. Historians have called him humanist. The Jews call him Mashiach, or anointed one. His own people called him father, and even the Ionian Greeks whom he conquered called him a just and worthy lawgiver and ruler.
By 554 BC, Cyrus had crushed all rivals and became the undisputed leader of Persia. Now it was time to conquer the world. And if he was going to build an empire, he would need a magnificent capital city to reflect its growing stature. In 550 BC, Cyrus launched one of the most ambitious engineering projects anywhere in the ancient world. The Persian Empire's first great capital city at Pasargad, located in modern Iran. Like the Romans centuries later, the Persians were borrowers. They took the best and most advanced ideas from the cultures they conquered, then developed them even further into technologies uniquely their own. The art and engineering of Pasargad drew on influences as far-flung as Assyria, Egypt, and Asia Minor. Today, over 2,500 years later, crumbling ruins are the only remnants of what was once here. Persia's first shining capital city. Pasargad's showpiece was its two magnificent palaces, surrounded by a majestic park and vast formal gardens. Among them, the first known appearance of the astonishing Paradisia, the four-quartered walled Persian gardens. The gardens had over 1,000 yards of channels of carved limestone, designed such that water would enter small basins every 16 yards. The Paradisia of Pasargad laid the foundations for many of the world's most magnificent gardens for the next 2 millennia. But Cyrus was a very different kind of king. He refused to enslave his new subjects, a revolutionary concept in the ancient world.
He recognized the local validity, if you will, of different religions and beliefs, and allowed those things to persist.
In 539, Cyrus conquered Babylon, but he did not present himself as a conqueror. He presented himself as a liberator, rescuing these people from their despotic ruler. And then he did a totally unprecedented thing. He freed the Jews. The Jews had been living in Babylon in captivity ever since Nebuchadnezzar destroyed Jerusalem and their temple, and Cyrus freed them.
Cyrus the Great died in battle in 530 BC. By the time Cyrus died, the Persian Empire had 3 capitals, Babylon, Susa, and Ecbatana. But he chose to be buried in the city he created, Pasargad, in a tomb that mirrored the man who built it.
One of the aspects that shows his humility is that tomb is relatively unadorned, very simple, very elegant.
Then a distant cousin of Cyrus, a brilliant general, rose up to assume power. His name was Darius. And he would become arguably the greatest Persian king and one of the greatest builders of all time. He began by rebuilding the old capital of Susa with grand new palaces adorned in glazed brick Today, the magnificence of the capital Susa is even found in the Bible. But the new king of Persia wanted a ceremonial capital all his own. 518 BC, Darius launched one of the most ambitious construction projects of the ancient world. Located near the modern city of Shiraz, it would become known as Persepolis, or Persian city in Greek. All of the palaces rose from a vast stone platform designed to enhance the stature of the empire.
The terrace square is huge, over 125,000 square meters. And he had to modify the landscape. His engineers had to come in and level out part of the area, and they had to build a retaining wall. He wanted it to be seen from a distance. That makes it all the more grand and imposing.
Persepolis was a colossal engineering challenge, with walls more than 60 feet high and 35 feet thick, and great halls featuring intricately designed columns. Most ancient empires were built by massive armies of slave labor, but Darius, like Cyrus, believed in paying for the work that built Persia's palaces and monuments. The magnificent audience hall Darius built was called the Apadana.
Each of those great monumental stone pillars are inspired by the kinds of wooden pillars that upheld a beautiful canvas roof. But now that canvas roof has turned to beautiful cedar wood instead. So the nomadic origins of the Persians gives the impetus to part of their architecture, but that's not all.
The city's palaces were adorned in gold and silver, expensive tapestries, and colorful tiles. The walls were studded with carved reliefs of peaceful depictions of visiting dignitaries from conquered lands. But Persepolis' spectacular engineering achievements extended far beyond the city walls. Its intricately designed and constructed water and drainage system were unrivaled anywhere.
Under the brilliant leadership of Darius, the Persian Empire grew to staggering size. It included modern Iran and Pakistan, parts of Afghanistan, Armenia, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, Lebanon, Jordan, Palestine, parts of Central Asia, all the way to northern India.
515 BC, Darius orders his engineers to build a massive stone highway, one that would weave the empire together from North Africa to India. Extending over 1,500 miles of the empire, he would call it the Royal Road.
This was quite the engineering feat because this had to traverse through mountains, forests, deserts. So typically earth would be packed, hardened, for example. They may not have had asphalt, but they certainly had knowledge of packing gravel or tiny rocks.
The Royal Road was linked by 111 rest stations and inns every 18 miles, where travelers could eat, sleep, and switch to fresh horses. To ensure safety, watchmen were posted all along its great length. But Darius still wasn't through. He had his engineers devise a giant canal linking the Mediterranean and the Red Sea. With the Persian knowledge of hydrology, Darius's engineers used digging tools made of bronze and iron to first open the canal, then clear any blown sand and line it with stone ready for his ships to sail.
Parts of the canal between the Nile and the Red Sea were actually not waterways, but just points along which the ships could be dragged until they reached another deeper portion where they could again sail their course.
By 500 BC, Persia was the largest empire the world had ever seen, even exceeding the size and wealth of Rome at its height 4 centuries later. Persia was invincible, and its appetite for conquest was beginning to frighten an emerging power across the Mediterranean, the city-states of Greece.
That big body of water out there is the Black Sea. This thin body of water here is the Bosphorus Strait that connects the Black Sea to the Mediterranean. So I'm standing in Asia, or Asia Minor, if you will, and that land over there is Europe. Now, in 494 BC, Darius put down a revolt from some cities on the coast of Turkey. But this revolt had been supported by Athens, so Darius wanted to teach Athens a lesson. He was going to march on Greece and attack that city. But how is he going to do it? He's got to go across the sea. Well, he takes a bridge of boats, pontoons, if you will, and lines them up from that point to that point and marches an army, so Herodotus says, of 70,000 men across the sea to attack Greece. Amazing.
Sucked into a bloody slaughter pit, the Persians suffered heavy losses and retreated. It's been 10 years since the Greeks defeated Darius the Great at the Battle of Marathon. His son Xerxes is now the latest absolute monarch in Persia's Achaemenid dynasty, and Xerxes wants revenge. The Persian invasion of Greece would be one of the greatest collaborations of strategy and engineering in military history. The massive invasion would be a complex land-sea assault, demanding some astonishing feats of engineering. 480 BC, the Greeks had defeated the Persian fleet at Thermopylae. The aura of invincibility that surrounded this empire was gone. In 465 BC, the Persian king Xerxes died. Xerxes left the empire to his son, Artaxerxes, who was determined to take Persia back to its golden days. He began by turning his attention to a building project begun by his grandfather, Darius. 4 decades after it was started, Persepolis, the magnificent capital city, was still under construction. Now, Artaxerxes would oversee one of the last great engineering projects of the Persian Empire. Today, we know it as the remarkable Hall of 100 Columns.
They're working with what we might consider to be primitive tools, just stone mallets and bronze chisels, that's all. The fluting on the columns of Persepolis is so precise, however, that these are clearly the work of master craftsmen.
Any client king, any governor from a distance, or even anyone who would come in that hall would be so impressed by the vastness of the hall and by this forest of columns that stretched nearly as far as the eye could see. An amazing achievement.
In 336 BC, a distant relative of Artaxerxes rose to power. Over the next 4 years, Alexander and Darius III met head-to-head in a series of fierce battles, as Darius III's army was slowly pushed back to its own doorstep. In 330 BC, Alexander was at the gates of the empire's crown jewel, the capital city of Persepolis. The last Achaemenid king was dead. Alexander gave Darius III a magnificent funeral, and later even married his daughter. Alexander declared himself an Achaemenid Persian king and added the final chapter to the story of an empire that had spanned 3 continents and endured for over 2,700 years.